think I have something to say beyond what you said, and I'm happy you said what you said. But let me just put a picture very quickly for you as to what is the need of different food groups in India. Now, this is plotted, as you can see. You can't see my arrow, but it's got 5 food groups: cereals, meat, pulses, vegetables, and milk. And I've taken the recommendations from the Indian from the NIN food tables, and this is what we need. And the black dots there are what we produce. And these are taken again from different tables from, and I can show you those data. But you can see that we seem to be producing approximately what we need in terms of cereals, a little less in terms of meat and fish, a lot less in terms of pulses. Vegetables looks good, a little more, but it is mainly potatoes and onions. And milk has gone up. Milk has gone up to the sound of a huge sucking sound that you hear from the procurement of milk from rural areas, which takes it all away, in my opinion, and then takes it into more urban centers and indulges in value-added practices to milk, which means that most of the poor people who produce that milk don't get it back. But that's another story. I'm just telling you that if you look at what you need versus what you produce, it's not too bad. And can you see where the dots have dropped now? That's what we find that we eat, and this is based again on surveys from NIN. And what you will see is that again cereals are pretty good, but meat and fish, pulses, much lower than what is required. Vegetables, much lower than what's required. Fruit is almost non-existent. And of course milk is much lower again, because that's for the whole country. If I take it for rich people, it'll probably be better. But this is the problem, that there is a great deal of, I mean, the point that has been made before is that we have to think about availability, affordability, accessibility. But I think culturally appropriate is very, very important. I mean, there are people who are producing rice, for example, in Bangalore, just south of Bangalore. If you drive towards Mysore, there's a place called Mandya where they produced a rice that they call an aerobic rice, which requires no flooding. And I'm not sure that's being accepted, although it's being pushed, and there's a lot of extension work around it. Whether or not that's being accepted by people who buy that rice is a big problem. So culturally appropriate rice is such a difficult thing, because people have very fixed notions of what a good rice should be. There are also rices that seem to almost approach a pulse in terms of the amount of protein they contain. 17% is one claim made by the University of Agricultural Sciences. And that rice is also being pushed in the Mandya region. I'm not sure how that rice tastes, because the gelatinization of rice and the mouthfeel is very dependent on the amount of starch it contains. So I think acceptability is a critical point. You can do what you want, but eventually people have to buy it. It has to be sustainable, and of course it has to have a low environmental impact. So these are all the things. So my point with this slide was really to show you that if you just look at production versus requirements, you'll find that, well, it's not too bad if you take the whole country as an average. But if you start looking at the poorer sections, and particularly consumption, you'll find that it's dramatically lower. So we've been hearing about this, that eventually the policy drivers of food production and supply, and I'm only talking to you about undernutrition, is that providing energy through a subsidy program is everything you need to do. You need to fill a stomach. And that's based on the history of famine and the determination that we would be self-sufficient against hunger. And of course it led to a cereal-centric system, the Green Revolution, aided somewhat by the WHO and the FAO feeling that protein was not important at all. But you know, what's joined into this whole thing has been the hidden hunger headlines, which really led to this enthusiasm for fortification. And it's become like a nostrum, really. It means you can do anything, you can cure everything. And I think there's a perversity in this, that if you think you'll fortify chemically foods that are unsatisfactory and therefore create a way by which you meet needs. The perversity for me is not that you may gain something in the short term, but that you take the lens away from the responsibility of our governance to produce good quality food, because it almost means like, oh well, you can throw some salts and chemicals into pretty much hopeless food otherwise, and you've done it, and you can sit back. That's wrong, and I actually see that happening, and India is a great example of this, that there's such a great enthusiasm for fortification that it seems that we've done our job. And I really want that we should say we have done nothing at all by chemically fortifying food. Well, we can discuss that. So that's basically led to this, and you can see that on this slide, right from the 1950s to present, the only line that seems to have been stable has been cereals, right on top, the blue line. There's been a line of increasing production of vegetables and milk, but that again, as I will tell you, is not for the people who need it. It's produced by the people who need it, but it's not eaten by the people who need it. Pulses actually have gone down to almost nothing. Eggs and meat and fish are rising, of course, as was pointed out by Purvi. So pulses really needs help. And I'll probably put up a little more of a provocative slide a little later. I'm not an agriculturist, but perhaps there will be agriculturists here who can advise me if I'm thinking correctly. Now, I showed you all these differences, and you can model this in any number of ways, all right? I want to tell you this, you can optimize, you can model. So I just thought, let me just make a simple back of the envelope type of calculation, which is based on a radar chart, which anchors your food intake to what your requirements should be. It just takes the ratio of what you should eat and what you are eating. And if you're eating what you should be eating, you'll have a value of 1 for that nutrient. So in general, you can plot that on that radar chart. You can see it's got different nutrients, and there's the black hexagon or whatever polygon that's there, that is the value of 1. Now, if you take the NNMB, that is a survey done by the National Institute of Nutrition in rural areas, and if you look at their foods, you'll find that, gosh, that diet should have, the red line should have been matching or greater than the black polygon. It isn't, it's contracted. It's only there in one place, and that's for vitamin C, and I wanted to also make this point. Ruth, because you said there are many things we don't know, and that we don't know what foods contain, you're absolutely right. But I want to tell you, and this is really important, that we don't know, even if the food has it, you don't know if you're going to absorb it. And this is a terrible mistake that's being made with many foods that are considered, like the forgotten foods one can talk about. They are high in iron, they are high in vitamin C, but if you cook them, the vitamin C disappears. And this is the problem. These are raw food intakes, and it looks like vitamin C is good, but once that food was cooked, there's nothing left. You take iron, lots of iron in the food, well, you eat it, it's got a lot of polyphenols as well, green stuff that hangs on to the iron, you don't absorb it. So I think it's critical beyond what you were saying of what foods contain, and I agree with you. I think we need to know, and in all our models, we need to model in the bioavailability effect. And one great disappointment that I've been having has been with the bioavailability of proteins from plant sources. Pulses, I thought I'm a great fan of pulses, and I thought that their proteins were pretty good quality, but they're not. And as a result, I mean, we've been measuring the protein digestibility and quality of many pulses in India, particularly in less than 2-year-old girls. My student at the back there is going to make a presentation on that tomorrow, and it's 60%. So you want to achieve something with those pulses that you're pushing so much and you're saying that are so great. If you want to achieve protein adequacy, you probably need to give a bit more, or you need to process it and cook it in ways that are important. Now, my point was, you had a bad diet there. What do you do to make that diet better? In other words, how do you get that shrunken red line to expand and match the polygon of adequate nutrition? Well, you start adding things. So you can add farmed foods, and this is the kind of optimization you can do in 100 different ways, all right? I don't want to overcomplicate it, but just in a simple way, you can, for example, add 100 grams of rice and 50 grams of pulses, or you can add some GLV, green leafy vegetable, you can add some palm oil, and you can see that you begin to muscularly expand this red shrunken thing into a much broader thing, except that vitamin C still looks great. Take that with a pinch of salt. It is going to be much less than that, but many of the others are not that heat labile. And the iron also has to be taken with a pinch of salt, because you have to think about how it will be absorbed. But the fact is that if you did all this, you would need this much extra diverse quality foods per month or per family. So you begin to think, and here's where the economics of the whole thing comes in, as to are we really producing this much? I mean, honestly, if you wanted to subsidize and give away that much of pulses, well, India produces about 20 million tons per year of pulses, and the mosquito. It produces 20 million tons of pulses. You need about 30 million tons. So are we going to produce that? And I'll tell you, maybe not. And I'll show you some, this is my data on agriculture, and this is a nutritionist pretending to be an agriculturist. Here it is. What drives farmers to sow what they reap, not reap what they sow? And here it is. If you look at the yield, you'll find that, well, if I gave you all 1 acre of land and said, go out and do your best, you'd probably plant sugarcane, because you get the best yield. You get about 70 to 100 tons. But you plant cereals, you get about 2.5. Pulses is pathetic. You'll get half a ton. It should get about 2 tons, but you get half a ton in India because we don't irrigate for pulses. Oilseeds, well, it's there. Here's your input cost per acre. So if I gave you 1 acre of land, and I also then said some of you are poor and some of you are rich, you'll find that those of you who are rich and wanted to get richer would again go for sugarcane. But those of you who are subsistence farmers would go for the crop that you have the least input costs, and that is millets. That's everywhere. And then you then look at their yield, and you look at your minimum support price, and then you work out your earnings, and it looks very clear here that sugarcane, if there was someone who would buy it from you to mill it, and if you didn't care about surface water, make it sugarcane. Or if you didn't care about obesity and all the bad things. But if you really were a poor farmer, you'd get the least out of your millets, but you would put your input costs would be the lowest. And that's the tragedy of this whole thing, because millets is a good thing. There's least input costs, and really there should be a way by which we promote it. Pulses, look at that, it's 25,000 rupees per year, per crop. And cereals, the reason you would grow it is because someone would come along and procure it for you. That's the most important part of farming. You can produce what you want, but if there's no one to take it off your hands, that's a dead investment. And it's a terrible thing to go down the roads sometimes in the tomato season in Karnataka and just see tomatoes dumped on the roadside because nobody was there to procure it, to make some sauce or jams or whatever. I just wanted to tell you, all's not bad. Those are the old figures. The new figures the government has now produced new minimum support prices for pulses particularly. Look at that. Very healthy 50,000 rupees. And if you did that, well, you'd still be less than cereals, but it's still a fillip for pulses. And I'll tell you, I've sort of talked to a few people. Pulses are not grown the way they're grown in Australia and other countries, or Canada. Here we grow pulses as an intercrop, and it grows on residual water. It's not separately irrigated. But now people have started with the new minimum support price, actually growing pigeon peas as a whole crop. That is a great thing, but they're not getting the support price they wanted. So it's a very complex deal, because where the government procures, that minimum support price will be met. Where private people procure, you start getting into trouble, because these networks are horrible. They have middlemen, and they do all sorts of things to protect their interests. And of course, there's the elephant in the room. Whatever will the WTO think of all this if we start procuring pulses to feed our people? Right now we procure cereals to feed our people, and the WTO doesn't like it, because it sees it as an output subsidy, and it calls it an amber box violation, And India has tried very hard to get a peace clause in place to allow us to continue procuring cereals to feed our people. That is in itself such a fight. And the US, of course, is completely against this because they think for some reason that we are procuring our food to dump it onto other markets and distort those markets, which is a somewhat stupid, I'm sorry to say this, it's not an intelligent thing to think. But the thing is that we procure food to feed local people, not to dump. Now, if we wanted to diversify our foods and feed our people, believe me, you would not be able to, because the WTO will object strongly to India adding pulses or other foods into a procurement system, which then is distributed. So economists, take note. You have to figure out some distribution networks which don't make the WTO so upset. And here's the thing, at the Bali round and the Nairobi round, I think India and the rest of the WTO argued like mad. The US thought that they'd support it, it's not supporting us. And right now India has notified the WTO, this is just recently, and says that, oh, we don't procure more than 10% of what we produce. I don't know if that's true, but good for India. I think you're procuring food to feed your people. Right now the problem for me is it's easy to model what you need. You can complex it, you can simplify it, do what you want. You can figure it out. But your big problem is you work within a subsidy regime for poor people. How do you pull all this together? You can diversify. You have people growing lemon trees in schools or in Anganwadis in Bihar. That's one lemon tree for a school children, 100 school children. I want to tell you, you want to put lemons into food to make iron more bioavailable? You need 1 lemon per child. I mean, you're not going to do it with 1 lemon tree. So I think there's a whole understanding of bioavailability and requirements, but equally there's me here looking frustrated as hell, trying to think, well, I think I know what the problem is, but I also think you'll never solve it. So please help me out. That's why this panel is such a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Anura.